Namaste and welcome back. You're here for the UPSC News Analysis for April 30th, 2025. We know you need to stay informed efficiently, getting the insights that matter for your UPSC preparation.
Absolutely. And that's precisely our aim today. We're going deep into the key current affairs, breaking down the basic concepts, and crucially, linking them to potential mains questions, all delivered with an Indian perspective in mind.
Right. We want to cut through the noise. We've looked at a whole range of sources to pull out what's most relevant for you. Think international relations, domestic policy, security issues, social concerns.
It's about giving you that focused edge. Consider this your smart, curated update.
And we've got a packed agenda today, haven't we? We'll kick off with a UN chief's call for dialogue amid rising India-Pakistan tensions. Then we'll unpack the Supreme Court's ongoing hearing on Pegasus spyware and national security, a really thorny issue.
Definitely.
Then we shift gears to Karnataka, the bike taxi ban extension by the High Court, also looking at a hoax bomb threat in Bengaluru.
Yes, and staying in Karnataka, the High Court's directive to block Proton Mail, that's got big implications for digital privacy and security.
It does. Then, a very concerning report from Kerala, a rabies death despite vaccination. We'll also explore a potential judicial fix for India's, persistent waste management crisis.
And on the economic front, the industrial growth slowdown, what's driving it, and what needs to be done.
Plus, the ongoing debate over Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act, thwarted cyber attacks on Indian defense-linked websites, and finally, PM Modi's take on the NEP's impact.
Quite a range. So where should we start?
Let's begin with those India-Pakistan tensions. The recent terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, has obviously heightened things.
Indeed. And into this steps the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, urging restraint and dialogue. It's a familiar call in some ways, but always significant.
What's perhaps more telling is India's response at the UN. Ambassador Yojana Patel really didn't hold back, did she? Using the right of reply very forcefully.
No, she didn't. Calling Pakistan a rogue state, accusing it of backing terrorism, misusing UN platforms. Pretty strong stuff.
It paints a stark picture.
Yeah.
And it raises that classic diplomatic challenge, How can external bodies mediate when one side sees the core issue, like Kashmir, as purely internal?
Exactly. Limits the space for external engagement. Now, for prelims, you should definitely note Pahalgam's location and significance. Remember Antonio Guterres' tenure as UNSG?
Right, and the right of reply itself.
That's Rule 73 of the UNGA rules, allows a direct response. Also, flag the UNOCT, the UN Office of Counterterrorism, and VOTAN, the Victims of Terrorism Network. It's relatively new.
Okay, and the historical context is key too, I suppose, the major conflicts.
Absolutely. 1947, 65, 71, Kargil 99. And just glance at UN Charter Articles 1 and 2.4 on peaceful settlement and prohibiting force. Always useful.
So, looking beyond the headlines, what's the deeper relevance for mains preparation here?
Well, it really highlights the structural challenges in South Asian diplomacy, doesn't it? Pakistan's alleged support for non-state actors, India's efforts to isolate Pakistan diplomatically. It creates this deadlock where direct talks become, incredibly difficult.
And the UN's role feels quite limited.
It's delicate. Leverage is limited, particularly as India maintains Kashmir is an internal matter. But India also needs to be aware that statements like these and platforms like VOTAN, they do sort of internationalize the issue to an extent. It might shift global focus towards state accountability for sponsoring terror.
And there's a governance angle too, misuse of forums.
Yes, that's a definite concern. Using these platforms for national agendas rather than their intended purpose.
So in this tense situation, what's the suggested way forward for India?
India needs to maintain its firm stance against terrorism. No compromise there. But at the same time, continued engagement on multilateral platforms is crucial. Keep exposing any double standards.
Strategic communication is key then.
Strategic communication, yes, coupled with bilateral outreach to friendly nations to help isolate sponsors of terror. But, as the SG suggested, a measured response, avoiding further escalation, is probably the preferred path in such volatile situations.
Okay, let's pivot now to a very different but equally critical issue. The Supreme Court hearing on the alleged use of Pegasus spyware for national security.
Right. For anyone unfamiliar, Pegasus from the Israeli NSO group is incredibly sophisticated spyware. It can infiltrate phones without the user even knowing, extracting vast amounts of data.
Its power lies in exploiting those zero-day vulnerabilities. Things even the latest security updates might not catch.
Exactly. Makes detection extremely hard. And in India, the Supreme Court had previously set up a technical committee to investigate claims it was used against citizens, including journalists and activists.
Then the core constitutional tension is Article 21, right to privacy, versus the state's duty to ensure national security. That's the crux of it.
Precisely. That's the balancing act.
So what's the latest from the courtroom? The bench seems to have raised an interesting point.
Yes, they question whether using Pegasus against so-called anti-national elements for national security is inherently wrong in itself. It's a subtle but important nuance.
Trying to find that balance.
They are. The petitioners, naturally, are pushing for the technical committee's report, the forensic analysis, to be made public. On the other side, the Solicitor General argued that terrorists can't claim a right to privacy.
And the court's view.
They seem to acknowledge privacy is fundamental, but crucially, it can't override national security. They floated the idea of perhaps informing individuals if they were hacked, but without revealing sensitive national security details.
But no full disclosure of the reports if sovereignty is at risk.
Correct. They've refused that for now. The next hearing is set for July 30th.
Okay. For our prelims focus, what key terms and concepts should listeners lock down?
Definitely understand what Pegasus is. Remember, the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment from 2017, establishing privacy as a fundamental right under Article 21. Know about the SC-appointed technical committee.
And the sealed cover jurisprudence.
Yes, that concept where sensitive documents are submitted confidentially. Also, obviously Article 21, but also Article 19(1) on free speech. Maybe a quick look at the Maneka Gandhi case, which expanded personal liberty, and Article 17 of the ICCPR on international privacy rights.
And for Maine's analysis, what are the critical aspects to dissect?
This case forces us to confront that difficult trade-off between security needs and individual liberties. While the state must protect citizens, any surveillance has to be lawful, necessary, and proportionate.
There's the risk of a surveillance state if unchecked.
A serious risk. It undermines democratic freedoms, judicial independence, and that basic trust between citizens and the government. The court's cautious approach also reflects the ongoing challenges of cybersecurity and digital rights in an era of, well, increasing threats.
And the secrecy aspect, the sealed cover.
That raises concerns about transparency in judicial proceedings. Plus, there are ethical questions. Consent, the potential chilling effect on a free press and activism, and the current lack of a comprehensive data protection law in India.
So, navigating this complex terrain, what's the path forward?
There's an urgent need to modernize India's surveillance laws, aligning them with the Puttaswamy privacy principles. This means clear judicial oversight for any surveillance authorization.
And a data protection law.
Absolutely. A robust Personal Data Protection Act is critical. We also need transparency mechanisms that don't compromise national security, clear standard operating procedures for using surveillance tools to ensure accountability, and, frankly, more public debate on how we strike this balance. It's vital for maintaining a constitutional democracy.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to a more local but highly impactful issue, the ongoing saga of the bike taxi ban in Karnataka.
Right. For many commuters, services from aggregators like Rapido, Ola, Uber have become essential, offering affordable, flexible transport. But their legal status has been murky.
And isn't there an argument that the government's delay in framing guidelines is actually hindering the gig economy and hurting riders? Could the court have pushed harder for a quicker fix?
That's a very valid point. The core of the issue lies in the Motor Vehicles Act, 1988, specifically Section 93 regarding aggregator licensing. The key thing is, the Karnataka government still hasn't issued specific guidelines to regulate bike taxi operations.
So without those formal guidelines or permits, their operation is legally questionable.
Essentially, yes. It creates this gray area.
And the latest development. The High Court seems to have intervened again, extending the deadline to stop operations.
That's right. On April 30th, the High Court pushed the deadline to June 15th. This came after pleas from Rapido, Ola, and Uber arguing they needed more time for the large number of riders to find alternative livelihoods.
They mentioned policy representations are still pending with the government.
Yes, and while a stakeholder meeting happened on April 23rd, no final decision emerged. Remember, the original deadline to halt operations was April 2nd, set by a previous court order pending government guidelines under Section 93.
But the State Advocate General opposed the extension.
Interestingly, yes, arguing that the outcome of that meeting couldn't be considered a final government decision.
For prelims prep, what are the key legal and policy points to be aware of here?
Focus on Section 93 of the Motor Vehicles Act, 1988 Licensing and Regulation of Aggregators. Understand what transport aggregators are. The concept of contract carriage permits, usually needed for commercial vehicles, including bikes, is important too.
And the rule of law aspect.
Exactly. The principle that policy should ideally be backed by clear legal provisions. Also worth noting that other states, like Goa and Delhi, have framed policies allowing bike taxis, showing it's a regulatory possibility.
And looking at it from a Maine's perspective, what are the broader issues and impacts at stake?
Several layers here. First, the legal ambiguity created by the lack of a formal policy leads to ongoing litigation and uncertainty for everyone. Second, a ban significantly impacts the livelihoods of many informal sector workers relying on bike taxi income.
Regulatory inconsistency across states is also a problem.
Definitely. Creates challenges for tech aggregators trying to build scalable models. It also raises that fundamental question, balancing the provision of an affordable public service against the need for legal compliance.
And the impacts.
Impacts on society, particularly urban commuters, on the economy, especially the gig economy, and on governance, highlighting the need for more proactive policymaking for fast-evolving transport tech. There's also an ethical dimension balancing livelihoods versus legal sanctity.
So what's the way forward to resolve this?
The most immediate need is for the Karnataka government to expedite notifying a clear policy under Section 93 to end the current ambiguity. This process must involve thorough consultation with all stakeholders, aggregators, police, rider unions, passengers, to ensure a workable framework. Ideally, we should aim for a more uniform national regulatory framework for bike taxis to avoid these state-specific confusions.
Rider safety needs prioritizing too.
Absolutely. Any new policy must safeguard riders, including insurance and perhaps skilling provisions for those needing to transition due to regulatory changes. Finally, using the data generated by aggregator platforms could help create evidence-based regulations addressing safety, compliance, and even fare control effectively. This touches on Indian polity, current affairs for prelims, and GS Papers 2 and 3.
Moving on, let's discuss a worrying incident. The recent hoax bomb threat at Acharya Institutes in Bengaluru. Thankfully, it was a hoax, but it still raises serious questions.
It does. It's unsettling how much disruption and anxiety such an irresponsible act can cause, affecting the institutions, students, staff, and their families.
And while it's a relief it was false, these incidents can't be taken lightly, can they? They cause public panic, divert emergency resources.
Exactly. And under Indian law, these acts are criminal offenses.
Which specific legal provisions apply in such cases?
Several sections of the Indian Penal Code, IPC, and the IT Act 2000 are relevant. Specifically, IPC Section 5051B deals with statements creating public mischief or fear. Section 507 addresses criminal intimidation by anonymous communication.
And the IT Act.
The IT Act covers the misuse of electronic means, like email in this case, to send threats or hoaxes.
Okay. And in this specific instance at Acharya Institutes, what do we know about the incident and the follow-up?
The institutes received the hoax threat via email. Police conducted thorough anti-sabotage checks and confirmed it was false. An FIR has been lodged based on a complaint from the college's COO citing criminal intimidation by an anonymous person.
Cyber experts are involved now.
Yes, they're trying to trace the sender's IP address. Worryingly, this seems to be part of a pattern of similar threats targeting other colleges in western Bengaluru recently.
For our prelims focus, what key legal and procedural details should be noted?
It's worth noting the punishment under IPC Section 507, up to 2 years imprisonment for criminal intimidation by anonymous communication. Briefly understand cybercrime investigation techniques like IP tracing and analyzing email headers. Also be aware of standard disaster response protocols like anti-sabotage checks.
And from a Maine's perspective, what are the broader implications of such hoax threats?
These incidents highlight the tension between public safety and the potential misuse of anonymity in the digital space. Freedom of speech doesn't extend to acts causing public panic and diverting essential resources.
The psychological impact must be significant too.
Absolutely, even if the threat turns out false. It also exposes limitations in cyber policing. Tracing anonymous threats can be technically challenging and requires coordination across service providers. The disruption to education, the potential need for institutions to revise security protocols, and the overall need for effective legal deterrence are all important governance considerations.
So what steps can be taken to address this issue more effectively?
Several measures are needed. Strengthening cybercrime units within police forces, equipping them with advanced forensic tools and specialized training is vital.
And institutional readiness.
Yes, educational institutions need to enhance their preparedness through regular safety drills and close coordination with local police. Raising public and student awareness about the serious legal consequences of making hoax threats is also necessary.
Technology could play a role.
Implementing advanced digital monitoring systems, perhaps using AI-based filtering for institutional communications to detect threatening content, could provide early warnings. Finally, ensuring swift investigation and prosecution in these cases can act as a strong deterrent. This connects to IPC, IT Act, internal security, and public safety governance in the UPSC syllabus.
Right. Let's turn our attention now to a rather unusual directive from the Karnataka High Court, ordering the central government to block access to Proton Mail in India.
Yes, this is quite significant. For those unfamiliar, Proton Mail is an email service known for its strong encryption and user privacy features.
Based in Switzerland, right? Uses end-to-end encryption.
That's correct. And a zero-access architecture, meaning technically even Proton AG itself can't access user email content. While this offers high privacy, it unfortunately also creates potential for misuse by those involved in clandestine cybercrime, like harassment or distributing illegal content.
And this brings Section 69A of the IT Act into play.
Exactly. Section 69A of the Information Technology Act 2000 empowers the Indian government to block public access to information on any computer resource in the interest of national security, public order, or for preventing incitement to offenses, provided due process is followed.
So what were the specific grounds for the Karnataka High Court's directive in this instance?
The order came from Justice M. Nagaprasanna while hearing a petition by M. Moser Design Associates India, a Bengaluru-based company. They alleged Proton Mail was being used to send obscene, abusive, and even deepfake content, specifically AI-generated explicit images targeting their female employees.
The court also orders specific URLs blocked.
Yes, immediately blocking the URLs carrying this offensive content. The petitioner argued that despite filing a police complaint back in November 2024, there had been no significant progress in the investigation, and no request for international legal assistance, like an MLT, had been made to Switzerland.
And they claimed Proton Mail was deceptive about server location.
Yes. They claimed Proton Mail misleadingly allowed users to select India as a server location, giving a false impression it operated within India, thereby complicating jurisdictional accountability.
For our prelims preparation, what key legal and technical terms should we be aware of in this context?
Make sure you understand Section 69A of the IT Act 2000 giving the government blocking powers. Also be aware of the blocking rules, 2009, particularly Rule 10 outlining the process.
And MLEs.
Yes, the concept of mutual legal assistance treaties, formal agreements between countries for legal help in cross-border investigations like cybercrime. Understand end-to-end encryption and the implications of zero-access architecture. Finally, be aware of deepfake technology and its potential for malicious use.
And for our mains analysis, what critical issues and challenges does this directive raise?
This case really spotlights the jurisdictional gaps when dealing with platforms based outside India. These foreign-based platforms can sometimes evade Indian legal compliance by hosting servers elsewhere.
It brings up that fundamental tension again, digital anonymity versus accountability.
Exactly. Privacy-focused services, while important for legitimate users, can unfortunately be misused to bypass regulation and facilitate illegal activities. The apparent delay in using MLATs or Interpol tools points to challenges in cross-border cooperation in cybercrime investigations.
And the specific targeting of women.
The rise in cases of cyberstalking, harassment, and deepfake threats targeting women underscores systemic failures in ensuring safety in digital spaces. From a governance perspective, it raises questions about India's digital sovereignty and its ability to effectively regulate global tech firms operating within its borders.
Public trust could be affected too.
Yes, if victims of cybercrime feel justice is delayed due to these transnational hurdles, this situation could lead to broader policy debates about regulating encryption tech and cross-border data sharing, and it might even strain diplomatic relations, possibly with Switzerland in this case, if legal cooperation is seen as inadequate.
So what are the potential ways forward to address these complex issues?
Several steps could be taken. Law enforcement agencies should probably expedite the process of using mutual legal assistance treaties when dealing with foreign-based platforms.
Updating the blocking rules.
Yes, there might be a need to update and streamline the IT blocking rules to make them faster, more transparent, while also safeguarding fundamental rights. Pushing for data localization, mandating platforms operating in India store user data on Indian soil could also improve accountability.
A specialized cybercrime cell.
Establishing a dedicated cross-border cybercrime cell within law enforcement could help investigate cases involving foreign-hosted platforms more effectively. Ensuring judicial oversight in the process of blocking platforms is crucial to prevent overreach and maintain due process. Finally, promoting public awareness about digital hygiene, the potential misuse of AI-generated content, and mechanisms for reporting cybercrime is vital. This touches on the IT Act, cybercrime laws, international agreements, governance, women's safety, and tech policy.
Sadly, we now have to turn to a very distressing public health issue. The recent death of a young girl in Kerala from rabies, despite her having received vaccinations after a dog bite.
Yes, this is truly tragic, and it highlights a serious ongoing challenge, particularly in Kerala, with its growing stray dog population and the persistent threat of rabies.
Rabies is almost always fatal once symptoms appear, isn't it?
It is. That's why post-exposure prophylaxis, or PP, which involves thorough wound washing, a course of anti-rabies vaccine, and in severe cases, rabies immunoglobulin, or RIG, is absolutely critical after potential exposure.
And what are the details of this specific case that are so concerning?
The victim was a 6-year-old girl, Zia Ferris, from Peruvlur in Kerala. She tragically died from rabies about a month after being bitten on the head and limbs by a stray dog, despite receiving the anti-rabies vaccine.
The bite was in late March.
Yes, March 29, 2025, and she passed away in April at the Kozhikode Government Medical College. Her family has alleged negligence in her treatment at a government hospital, though authorities deny this, stating all protocols were followed.
And the broader statistics in Kerala are worrying.
Extremely. Health department figures show 12 rabies deaths in the state so far in 2025. The overall trend is alarming. 22 deaths reported in 2024, a significant jump from only 2 deaths back in 2016.
For our prelims focus, what essential facts and concepts related to rabies should we remember?
You should know the rabies virus itself, belonging to the Lysovirus genus. Understand the WHO classification of dog bites, especially Category 3 bites those involving the head, face, neck, or multiple wounds, as these require both the anti-rabies vaccine and rabies immunoglobulin.
Remember what PP involves.
Yes, wound washing, ARV doses, and the crucial role of RIG in severe exposures. Remember, rabies is a classic zoonotic disease transmitted from animals to humans. It's also helpful to be aware of relevant schemes like the National Rabies Control Program, NRCP, the Animal Birth Control Plus Anti-Rabies, AAR program, and the broader One Health approach, which stresses the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health.
And when we analyze this from a mains perspective, what key issues and challenges does this tragic case highlight?
It raises several critical concerns. First, the possibility of failures in clinical protocols, specifically potential under-administration or delayed administration of rabies immunoglobulin, RIG, in severe bite cases, especially involving the head.
Gaps in public awareness could be a factor too.
Possibly. Gaps regarding the severity of rabies and the need for immediate and complete post-exposure prophylaxis. The persistent stray dog menace, often linked to poor implementation of animal birth control programs, is another major contributing factor.
And coordination issues.
There seems to be a lack of a fully integrated health response, perhaps inadequate coordination between veterinary, civic, and human health departments. These incidents have wide-ranging impacts, causing significant health risks and psychological distress in communities, raising questions about governance, particularly failures in animal control and public health systems, leading to loss of public trust and ethical dilemmas concerning animal rights versus human safety.
So what steps can be taken to prevent such tragedies in the future?
Several measures are crucial. Strict monitoring of protocols for managing rabies cases in hospitals is needed, particularly thorough audits of RIG administration in severe bite cases. Community awareness campaigns are essential to educate the public about bite categories, the critical need for prompt PP, and the importance of completing the full treatment course. Strengthening and scaling up the ABCAR program in all districts, perhaps with better central coordination nationally, is vital for controlling the stray dog population.
A better surveillance network.
Yes, a robust rabies surveillance network integrating reports from hospitals, local bodies, and animal welfare boards could provide real-time data for effective intervention. Implementing the One Health strategy to better synchronize veterinary and human healthcare systems is key for tackling zoonotic diseases like rabies. Finally, establishing clear mechanisms for compensation and grievance redressal for victims of animal bites could help restore public confidence. This issue has significant relevance for prelims, zoonotic diseases, NRCP, and mains, public health, governance failures, ethical considerations.
Our next topic delves into a long-standing environmental challenge for India, managing its ever-growing waste. There seems to be a call for more forceful judicial intervention to tackle this crisis.
Absolutely. India's high ranking in plastic pollution, highlighted by that recent Nature study placing us as a major global contributor, underscores the urgency. The Solid Waste Management Rules of 2016 clearly assign primary responsibility for waste management to urban local bodies and panchayats.
Mandating source segregation, setting up material recovery facilities.
Right. And scientific disposal in sanitary landfills. Plus, the concept of extended producer responsibility, or EPR, puts the onus on producers, importers, and brand owners, PIBOs, to manage the waste generated by their products.
And what's the specific proposal being put forward for a more effective remedy?
Environmental lawyer Archana Vaidya brings some critical insights. She points out that official waste data in India is likely a significant underestimate, with a major gap between claimed high collection rates and the reality of overflowing landfills and dump sites.
Lack of rural data, too.
Yes, she highlights the lack of reliable waste data from rural areas and the absence of transparent waste audit methodologies. Her proposal includes creating a nationwide geotagged infrastructure map to accurately track waste generation and management facilities. She also advocates scaling up PIBO-led EPR kiosks across the country, making them accessible to both urban and rural local bodies.
And the judicial angle.
Crucially, she urges courts to apply the principle of continuing mandamus, similar to how it was used in the Vellore tannery case. There, polluters were held strictly liable, and environmental remediation was ordered and monitored under judicial supervision.
Okay, for prelims, what key environmental concepts and legal tools should we be familiar with in this context?
You definitely need to understand the polluter pays principle, sustainable development, and the precautionary principle, all foundational to environmental law. Be familiar with the judicial tool of continuing mandamus, which allows courts to monitor the implementation of their orders over time.
And the specific rules and bodies.
Know the Solid Waste Management Rules, 2016, and the Plastic Waste Management Rules, also 2016. Be aware of the roles of the Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, and State Pollution Control Boards, SPCBs. Understand what material recovery facilities, MRFs, and extended producer responsibility, EPR, entail. Finally, be able to differentiate between a sanitary landfill, engineered for safe disposal, and a simple dump site, which often lacks environmental safeguards.
And when we analyze this from a mains perspective, what are the key issues and the significance of, say, the Vellore tannery case precedent?
This situation highlights several deep-seated issues: the lack of reliable, comprehensive data on waste generation and management, policy gaps like weak enforcement of the SWM rules, and failure to adequately integrate the informal sector into waste management systems, and the significant urban-rural divide in terms of waste infrastructure and capabilities.
Leading to a major environmental and public health crisis.
Ultimately, yes, pollution affects all aspects of our environment and human well-being. The Vellore tannery case provides a powerful judicial precedent. In that case, the Supreme Court held that failure to enforce environmental standards violates Article 21, the right to life, and implied what's sometimes called the government pay principle, holding the state responsible for compensating affected citizens and recovering remediation costs from polluters. It shows the potential for strong judicial action to drive environmental compliance.
So what are the potential steps to improve India's waste management system, especially incorporating these proposed judicial remedies?
Institutionalizing a robust system for waste data collection with mandatory audits and independent third-party verification across all local bodies is essential. Leveraging technology like GIS mapping and geotagging can significantly improve our ability to track waste infrastructure and coverage. Scaling up EPR operations by establishing easily accessible kiosk-based systems linked to local governments can ensure PIBOs fulfill their legal obligations.
Mandating linkages.
Yes, mandating linkages for all ULBs and rural panchayats to MRFs and certified recyclers is crucial for effective processing. Strengthening judicial monitoring using continuing mandamus can ensure consistent enforcement of waste management rules across all states. Finally, actively involving communities and the informal sector in waste segregation and recycling efforts with proper incentives and legal recognition can significantly boost the overall system. This clearly links to environmental acts, governance, the role of the judiciary, and sustainable development, all key UPSC areas.
Let's move to the economic front now and analyze a recent concern: the apparent slowdown in India's industrial growth and the resulting policy implications.
Yes, the latest Index of Industrial Production, or IIP, figures show a significant dip in growth for the fiscal year 2025, coming in at just 4%. That's the lowest in the past 4 years, down from 5.9% the previous fiscal.
And the IIP tracks activity across manufacturing, mining, and electricity, right?
Correct. Those are the three main sectors it covers.
So what's the sectoral breakdown telling us about this slowdown?
We saw a sharp drop in mining growth from 7.5% down to 2.9%. Manufacturing, which has the highest weight in the IIP, also slowed from 5.5% to 4%. Even the electricity sector saw a dip from 7% to 5.1%, despite some weather-related demand boosts in March.
But there was a divergence in consumer goods.
Very interesting, yes. Consumer non-durables actually saw negative growth of a nasty 1.6%, which strongly suggests continued stress in rural demand. In contrast, consumer durables grew by 8%, perhaps indicating some recovery in urban demand.
It's intriguing that rural demand seems sluggish despite relatively low overall inflation. Why might that be?
Well, even with headline retail inflation around 4.6%, farm incomes have been squeezed due to falling prices for some agricultural products like certain vegetables. This income squeeze directly impacts purchasing power and spending capacity in rural areas, hence the stress on non-durable consumer goods.
And what other factors might be contributing to this industrial slowdown?
Several things are likely at play. The Reserve Bank of India did cut the repo rate in April to 6%, aiming to boost borrowing and investment, but there's still some economic uncertainty, perhaps keeping private investment levels subdued.
Exports, too.
Yes, merchandise exports have remained relatively flat, which significantly impacts the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSME sector, as they contribute a major chunk of India's total exports. The ongoing trade deal negotiations with the U.S. are also critical for safeguarding the interests of these MSMEs.
For prelims, what key economic indicators and concepts should we focus on here?
Make sure you're familiar with the different categories of the IIP: manufacturing, mining, electricity, and their relative weights. Understand the crucial role and key statistics of the MSME sector in India: total number of enterprises, contribution to exports, employment.
Know the repo rate.
Definitely. Know what the repo rate is and how the RBI uses it as a monetary policy tool. Understand the difference between the Consumer Price Index, CPI, measuring retail inflation affecting households directly, and the Wholesale Price Index, WPI. Finally, be clear on what a bilateral trade agreement is, like the one being negotiated with the U.S.
And for mains analysis, what are the critical issues and potential impacts of this industrial slowdown?
The stagnation of rural demand, despite low headline inflation, points towards underlying structural weaknesses in the rural economy. The persistent underperformance of the manufacturing sector, despite being a major policy focus, is also a significant concern.
Private investment hesitancy.
Yes, the hesitancy in private capital expenditure, possibly influenced by global economic volatility, is another contributing factor. Stress on external trade, especially its impact on MSMEs, poses risks to their growth and sustainability. The lag in monetary policy transmission, where lower interest rates haven't yet translated into significantly higher investment, is also noteworthy.
And the broader impacts.
Potential rural distress, slower job creation, widening of the urban-rural economic divide, and negative implications for India's participation in global value chains and overall competitiveness.
So what are some potential ways forward to address this slowdown and boost growth?
Several strategies could be considered. To stimulate rural demand, measures like enhancing minimum support prices for farm produce and ensuring timely procurement, expanding rural employment schemes like MGNREGA, and boosting farm gate prices through improved agro-logistics and market reforms are important.
Revamping industrial strategy.
Yes, focusing on promoting sunrise sectors like green energy, electronics, and semiconductors, and perhaps expanding production-linked incentive, PLI schemes, to benefit MSMEs, not just large corporations. To boost domestic capital expenditure, the government can continue using its own capital spending to crowd in private investment and ensure easier credit access for MSMEs, alongside reducing regulatory burdens.
And trade.
Finalizing a favorable trade deal with the U.S. that protects the interests of smaller exporters and diversifying export markets beyond traditional partners are crucial steps. Finally, using disaggregated data from the IIP to design sector-specific interventions could lead to more targeted and effective policy responses. This is highly relevant for understanding various aspects of the Indian economy for UPSC prep.
Our next topic shifts focus to international affairs, specifically the ongoing controversies surrounding Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act, or PTA. It's a law that's drawn significant criticism over the years.
Indeed. Sri Lanka's PTA was first enacted in 1979, ostensibly as a temporary measure to deal with threats from Tamil separatist groups. However, it was made permanent in 1982 and has since been widely condemned by human rights organizations and international bodies for its draconian provisions.
Things like prolonged detention without trial.
Exactly, and admissibility of confessions made to police officers rather than directly to a magistrate. It also includes a problematic provision criminalizing failure to report certain information. Over the years, its use expanded beyond its initial target, being used against not just Tamil militants but also Sinhala insurgents, Muslim communities, journalists, and human rights defenders.
And what's the latest on efforts to repeal or reform this controversial law?
M.A. Samintharan, a prominent lawyer and former MP in Sri Lanka, has been a vocal advocate for the complete repeal of the PTA. He argues its oppressive nature and the consistent abuse of its provisions by state forces demand its total abolition.
Despite promises after the Civil War ended.
Yes. Despite Sri Lanka's promises post-2009 to repeal the PTA and significant international pressure, including the EU suspending its GSP plus trade concessions in 2010 due to rights concerns linked to the PTA, the law remains largely intact with only cosmetic changes.
Even the current government hasn't moved significantly towards repeal.
It seems not. Despite earlier signals of potential reform under President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, no substantial steps towards repeal have been taken. Recent arrests under the PTA show that mere moratoriums aren't effective, and any proposed replacements so far seem just as problematic as the original law.
There was a civil society campaign in 2021.
Yes, a cross-party civil society campaign involving Mr. Samanthiran garnered significant support across Sri Lanka's diverse communities, but unfortunately didn't translate into concrete policy changes.
For prelims prep, what key details about the PTA and its context should we be aware of?
Remember, the PTA was enacted in Sri Lanka in 1979 and made permanent in 1982. It's noted for being modeled on similar laws in the UK and apartheid-era South Africa. Know about the EU's GSP Plus scheme and its suspension for Sri Lanka linked to human rights concerns over the PTA.
And the JVP connection.
The Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna, JZP, a left-wing Sinhala party, also historically faced state repression under the PTA during its insurgency in the late 1980s. It's important to keep fundamental international legal principles like the rule of law and due process in mind, which the PTA is often seen as undermining. You could also draw a comparative link to India's own preventive detention laws, like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or UAPA.
And when we analyze the PTA from Amin's perspective, what are the critical issues and impacts that emerge?
The PTA raises significant concerns about the erosion of fundamental civil liberties, as it allows for prolonged detention, denial of bail, and has been linked to torture and coerced confessions. There are also allegations of its selective application, disproportionately affecting ethnic and religious minorities, as well as government critics like journalists and activists.
Democratic backsliding.
Its continued existence contributes to democratic backsliding in Sri Lanka and undermines claims of adherence to due judicial process. Despite both domestic and international pressure, the influence of the security establishment appears to be a major obstacle to repeal. The impacts are far-reaching. Continued human rights violations, damage to Sri Lanka's international relations, especially trade ties with the EU, a deep trust deficit between minority populations in the state, and hindering post-conflict reconciliation and transitional justice efforts.
So what would be the ideal way forward regarding Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act?
The most critical need is the complete repeal of the PTA, not just cosmetic or superficial reforms. Sri Lanka needs to enact modern, rights-based legislation to address security concerns, ensuring any new law is proportionate, subject to robust judicial oversight, and fully compliant with international human rights standards.
Independent monitoring.
Establishing an independent monitoring mechanism, perhaps a national human rights institution or ombudsman empowered to oversee detentions, arrests, and prosecutions under national security laws is vital. Guaranteeing basic judicial safeguards, right to habeas corpus, access to legal counsel, right to medical attention while in custody is also essential. Ultimately, repealing the PTA requires strong political will within Sri Lanka, coupled with sustained civic pressure from within the country and continued diplomatic engagement from the international community. This links to global institutions, human rights, comparative constitutional law, and ethics and governance.
Our final topic today takes us back into the digital domain and national security. Reports of cyber attacks targeting websites linked to the Indian defense sector, which were thankfully thwarted.
Yes, a timely reminder of the persistent and evolving threats in cyberspace, especially for sensitive sectors like defense. A cyber attack is basically a malicious attempt to gain unauthorized access, disrupt, or damage computer systems, networks, or data.
Common types include DDoS and defacement.
Exactly. Distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attacks aim to overwhelm a target server with traffic, making it unavailable. Website defacement involves altering a site's visual appearance or content, often for propaganda purposes. While India maintains robust cybersecurity measures, including firewalls around operational defense networks, publicly accessible websites linked to defense organizations can still be targets.
And what do we know about these specific cyber attacks that were reported?
Indian intelligence agencies confirmed 4 cyber attacks attributed to a Pakistan-based hacker group called IOK Hacker, or Internet of Khilafah. These attacks targeted websites related to defense, welfare, and education.
Which sites were affected?
The Army public schools in Srinagar and Raniket were affected, suffering defacement with propaganda material and a DDoS attack on the Srinagar site. The Army Welfare Housing Organization, AWHO website, was targeted with an attempted database breach, and a compromise attempt was detected on the Indian Air Force Placement Organization, IAFPO site.
But no classified systems were breached.
That's the good news. No classified or operational military systems were compromised. All affected websites were quickly isolated and restored, minimizing the overall impact.
For our prelims focus, what key terms and agencies related to cybersecurity should we keep in mind?
You should definitely be aware of the different types of cyber attacks like DDoS and defacement, as we mentioned. It's also important to know the key cybersecurity agencies in India, including CERTAN, the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, the Defense Cyber Agency, operating under the Integrated Defense Staff, and the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, NCIPC.
Relevant policies, too.
Review relevant national policies like the National Cybersecurity Policy 2013 and the Information Technology Act 2000, particularly sections dealing with cybercrime and cyberterrorism.
And from a mains perspective, what are the significant issues and implications arising from these thwarted cyber attacks?
These incidents highlight potential perimeter defense vulnerabilities that can exist even around military-affiliated organizations. They underscore the constant threat from cross-border cyber activities, often carried out by non-state or state-sponsored groups, especially in contexts of existing geopolitical tensions.
Even less sensitive sites were targeted.
The fact that less critical websites like military schools and housing organizations were targeted suggests potential gaps in cyber hygiene within these institutions. A major challenge in dealing with these threats is the difficulty in definitively attributing cyber attacks, which can complicate diplomatic and legal responses.
And the potential fallout.
Even if classified systems aren't breached, these attacks can disrupt strategic communications, carry risks of spreading propaganda and misinformation, and potentially raise diplomatic tensions, in this case between India and Pakistan. They necessitate continuous reassessment and strengthening of cybersecurity measures across all levels of defense-related infrastructure.
So what are some ways forward to enhance India's cybersecurity posture in the defense sector and beyond?
A multi-pronged approach is needed. First, strengthening the cyber perimeter, ensuring consistent and robust security protocols are applied to all defense-linked websites, including those related to education and welfare. Regular security audits and penetration testing are vital.
Offensive capabilities.
Second, India should continue enhancing its offensive cyber capabilities to deter potential adversaries. Improving coordination between public and private sector entities in the cybersecurity domain defense institutions, working closely with Indian tech firms and CERT-IN can lead to more effective real-time threat monitoring.
Cyber diplomacy.
Engaging in cyber diplomacy on multilateral platforms to establish norms of state behavior in cyberspace and hold actors accountable is also important. Finally, a continuous focus on awareness and training in cyber hygiene and incident response protocols for all personnel, including those in non-operational roles, is crucial. This clearly connects to internal security, India's relations with its neighbors, and the strategic importance of technology and national security, all key UPSC areas.
Finally, let's turn to the education sector and recent statements by Prime Minister Modi on the impact of the National Education Policy, or NEP, 2020. This policy has been a major focus of the government's reform agenda.
Absolutely. The National Education Policy 2020 represents a significant overhaul of India's education system, the most comprehensive in over 3 decades. Its core principles include promoting flexibility in learning paths, encouraging multidisciplinary education, and fostering holistic development of students.
And the structural change, the 5+3+3+4 framework.
Yes, a major structural shift is the move from the traditional 10+2 system to the new 5+3+3+4 framework.
And what specific aspects of the NEP's impact did Prime Minister Modi highlight in his recent address?
Speaking at the YUGM conclave, which brought together academia, industry, and innovators, the PM emphasized the transformative impact of the NEP on the country's education system. He specifically pointed to the readiness of new textbooks based on the National Curriculum Framework, or NCF, for classes 1 to 7, aligned with the NEP.
You mentioned the digital ecosystem, too.
Yes, he highlighted the establishment of a comprehensive digital education ecosystem, citing platforms like Diksha and PM eVidya, which are now providing access to educational content in over 30 Indian languages and even 7 foreign languages. The PM also noted the role of AI-based infrastructure making learning more scalable and inclusive, the promotion of interdisciplinary learning enabled by the National Credit Framework, NCRF, and the strengthening of the research ecosystem in higher education over the past decade.
For our prelims preparation, what key features and initiatives under NEP 2020 should we remember?
Remember that NEP 2020 replaced the 1986 National Policy on Education and aims for universalization of education from preschool to secondary level. Be clear on the breakdown of the new 5+3+3+4 system: foundational stage, pre-primary to class 2, preparatory 3 to 5, middle 6 to 8, and secondary 9 to 12.
Diksha and NCRF.
Understand the features and purpose of the Diksha platform as a national digital repository supporting QR-coded textbooks. Finally, know about the National Credit Framework and its goal of creating an academic bank of credits and ensuring greater parity between vocational and academic learning paths.
And when we analyze the NEP's impact and way forward from a May's perspective, what are the critical considerations?
While the NEP has ambitious goals, its implementation faces several issues and challenges. The digital divide in India means ensuring equitable access to digital education initiatives remains a significant hurdle.
Implementation gaps.
The successful rollout of the NEP heavily depends on its effective adoption and adequate funding at the state level, which can vary. There's a massive need for large-scale teacher training to equip educators with the skills and knowledge required for the new pedagogical approaches and curriculum. Creating high-quality educational content in a multitude of Indian languages is also a complex task.
But the potential impacts are significant.
Yes, potential impacts include enhancing equity and inclusion in education, better integrating skill development into the curriculum, boosting research and innovation, and strengthening linkages between education and industry.
So what are the key steps needed to ensure the successful implementation and maximize the benefits of the National Education Policy?
Ensuring a uniform and effective rollout of the National Curriculum Framework across all states and union territories is vital. Concerted efforts are needed to bridge the digital divide by expanding access to broadband, internet, and digital devices, especially in rural and underserved areas.
Teacher training is critical.
Large-scale, national-level teacher reskilling programs aligned with the new content and pedagogies are essential. Using data analytics from platforms like Diksha to monitor learning outcomes and make necessary adjustments to the curriculum can improve effectiveness. Investing in the creation of culturally relevant, high-quality educational resources in a wide range of local languages is crucial for inclusion. Finally, fostering robust public-private partnerships can leverage industry expertise for curriculum development and research innovation. NEP and its implementation are highly relevant for understanding education reforms, governance, digital infrastructure, and issues related to equity and inclusion.
And with that, we reach the end of our deep dive into the UPSC news analysis for April 30th, 2025.
Yeah.
As you've heard, we've covered a wide spectrum of interconnected issues, from international diplomacy and national security to social and economic policies, all relevant for your preparation.
Our aim today was really to break down these complex topics into digestible insights, providing you with both the foundational understanding and the critical perspectives needed for your UPSC journey. We hope it's been a valuable use of your time.
Do subscribe for our daily updates, and please drop a comment to share your thoughts. We value your feedback. You can also download the audio or transcript for revision.
Keep up the hard work.